This talk may be uncomfortable to listen to. It's surely uncomfortable to research. I know most of y'all in here. I'm John Stinson, retired from the Navy 2 years ago, the last day of the month. Like some others, I went to Iraq, I came back. I was kind of a broken man. I was in dark places for a long time. I spent the last 5 years of my career without my family, making it even darker times. I just wanted to give a little forethought of why I'm talking about what I'm talking about. Because, like I said, it is uncomfortable to research this information. And I guess I better get on with it. I gave my oath to protect against all enemies, foreign and domestic. We've got whistleblowers like Edward Snowden and many others being dragged through the mud by our lamestream media. And we've got like Edward Snowden having to leave the country. Why? Because he gave his oath to defend against all enemies, foreign and domestic. We've got the NSA spending tons and tons of our money to treat us like terrorists. Same with the TSA that escorts the terrorists through the scanners onto the airplanes. Look at the trials. Government making us fear them when they should be fearing us. We are the terrorists in their eyes because word is getting out about the manipulation and control that they are putting on us. This kind of information, like I said, is hard to study. Some people don't, you see it all the time on the media. Tinfoil hat wearing conspiracy theorists just pass it on as, oh, he's an idiot, oh, they're an idiot, whatever. So we're going to go and get a taste of the red pill. The media has been given a good job of shoving the blue pill down our throat as per the Matrix. My talk is perception-based reality. It's more accurately stated as deception-based reality. The Federal Reserve. Edward Griffin, is the author of a great book called The Creature from Jekyll Island. And in 1791, we had the first Bank of the United States. People said it has too much power, too much influence. It only lasted about 20 years. The Charter Renew failed, so they came up with the second Bank of the United States. It was even a bigger mess, more control, more power. People hated it. Once again, after about 20 years, the charter failed to renew. In 1907, severe financial panic jolted Wall Street, forced several banks into failure. Many Americans thought banking structure was out of date and needed major reform. 1909, first draft for the Federal Reserve Act, written by the Aldrich Bill, written by Aldrich. It was rejected by President Taft. 1913, the Glass-Owens or Owens-Glass Act was approved by Woodrow Wilson. Well, this act was drafted on Jekyll Island off the coast of Georgia. in 1910. Under great secrecy, Secretary Nelson Aldrich sent his private rail car to the New Jersey Railroad station, where he and 5 other men were instructed to come on one at a time and pretend not to know one another. Aldrich himself, a business associate of the J.P. Morgan, father-in-law to John D. Rockefeller Jr., and author of the original Federal Reserve Act. Any special interest there? Abram Poet Andrew, the Assistant Secretary of Treasury, was the second. Frank Vanderlyn, representing William Rockefeller. Henry Davison and Benjamin Strong with J.P. Morgan. And Paul Warburg, most of y'all would know him as Daddy Warbuck from Little Orphan Annie, from partner Kuhnlaub and Company, representing the Rothschild banking family. In this room now represents 1/4 of the wealth in all of the world. All these men were competitors, came together to create the banking cartel so they wouldn't have to compete with one another. They went in partnership with the government. The making of the Fed was done to stop the growing competition. Obtain franchise to create money out of nothing for the purpose of lending. Get control of all bankers' reserves. Shift losses from bank owners to taxpayers. We've seen that in recent times. To convince Congress that purpose was to protect the public. The banking elite has caused these hard times in the past, so they were involved with that time. So there's no elected official, no accountability, and they're privately owned. The Federal Reserve is private banks. Like I said, the last one was special interest from the Rothschild family. Here's 2 Rothschild quotes. Give me control of a nation's money, and I care not who makes its laws. I care not what puppet is placed on the throne of England to rule the empire. The man that controls Britain's money supply controls Britain's empire, and I control the money supply. Rothschild's recent information, let's see, they bought Reuters in 1800. Reuters bought the Associated Press. They own and operated England's Royal Mint, gold agent for Bank of England, control LBMA, which was London Bullion Market Association, earn millions weekly in transaction fees alone, fix the world price on gold on a daily basis, profiting from the ups and downs. They cornered the world gold supply, own controlling interests in the world's largest oil company, the Royal Dutch Shell, operate phony charities and offshore banking services where wealth of the black nobility and the Vatican is hidden in secret accounts. They have hand-picked presidents, crashed stock markets, bankrupted nations, orchestrated wars, sponsored mass murder and impoverishment of nations. The wealth of this one family alone could feed, clothe, and shelter everyone on earth. Recent estimates say this family is worth $900 trillion. The conservative estimate is $500 trillion. You split the difference between the two at $700 trillion. If we were to split up the wealth of this one family, we would each have an extra $100,000 in our pocket. Why are we taxed to death? Why do we have to have a marriage certificate, which is a tax, a driver's license? I would get into maritime law and their straw man. If I have enough time to touch on it, I will. And I didn't start my timer, so you'll give me a little heads up. I've got enough information here to talk for 3 hours. Now getting into the mainstream media. Have you ever wondered who controls the mainstream media in America today? We are more connected than ever. The average American watches 153 hours of television a month, and we also spend countless hours watching movies, playing video games, listening to music, reading books, surfing the internet. If someone could control the production of all that media, that would make them immensely powerful. They would literally be in a position to tell people what to think. Well, what if I told you that there are just six enormous media conglomerates that combine to produce about 90% of all the media that Americans consume? Would that alarm you? It should alarm you. The truth is that our attitudes, opinions, and beliefs are greatly shaped by what we allow into our minds. After all, they don't call it programming for no reason. Even those of us that realize that we are connected to the Matrix probably greatly underestimate the tremendous influence that the media has over us. We live at a time when it is absolutely imperative to think for ourselves, but most Americans are being absolutely overwhelmed with the information and seem more than content to let others do their thinking for them. Sadly, this is greatly contributing to the downfall of our society. And of course, the mainstream media desperately does not want you to look at the man behind the curtain. They just want you to stay plugged into the programming that they are feeding you without asking a question. 7 things about the mainstream media they don't want you to know. They have very deep ties to the establishment. They get things wrong very frequently. These journalists don't do journalism anymore. They get talking points sent to them by their bosses. And when it's gotten wrong by all of them. The American media does not consider media very trustworthy. Mainstream media and politicians hate the fact that they cannot control internet news sites. They're extremely liberal. 90% of all your media is controlled by 6 corporations. The American people are absolutely addicted to the mainstream media. That leads into predictive programming. Want a little interesting thing, look that up on your smartphone. Predictive programming. So, in 1983, 90% of American media was owned by 50 corporations. In 2011, 90% was owned by 6 corporations. Wow. Saudi Prince Al-Walid was the number 2 man at News Corp. Well, number 2 for Fox News, number 3 for News Corp. In 2014, he reduced his shares from 6.6% down to 1%, netting over $190 million. 232 media executives control the information diet of 277 million Americans. That's one media executive to 850,000 subscribers. Total for 2010 revenue, Big Six was $275.9 billion. That's $36 billion more than Finland's GDP, enough to buy every NFL team 12 times, and 5 times bigger than the bailout for General Motors. Big Six controls 70% of your cable. This is 2010. It's a lot more now. News Corps owns the top newspaper on 3 continents. In 2010, they avoided $875,000 million in U.S. taxes. That's 2 times. That's enough to double FEMA's budget, and 40 times more. I should not have used this. It's an infographic. I'm trying to read their information graphic and put it out in a talking point. Been so busy that I hadn't been able to look at all this stuff in one point. Drug manufacturers making a killing. The current healthcare system took root around the turn of the century when the AMA, Rockefeller Foundation, and Carnegie Foundation forged a partnership. They put their money into drug-based research and made that the main focus of healthcare. Since then, the Rockefeller and other prominent banking elite have been able to control and profit enormously from the drug industry. The AMA, which is the largest association of physicians in the U.S., enforces the drug treatment paradigm by heavily lobbying Congress and publishing one of the most influential journals, the JAMA, which is largely funded by pharmaceutical investors. It is also engaged in suppressing alternative health treatments such as Royal Rife cancer cure. Here's a brief history. In 1901, Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research opens. Based out of New York, this became one of the most richly endowed research centers. By 1928, John D. Rockefeller had given $65 million in endowment funds. This later became the Rothschild University. In 1910, Flexner report published establishes new standards for medical education. This highly influential report, sponsored by the Rockefeller and Carnegie Foundation, evaluated medical schools and restructured American medical education. It set up a new standard so that schools could only be accredited if they showed an emphasis in drug-based research and treatment. Homeopathy and other alternative approaches to medicine were no longer recognized. Abraham Flexner, author of the report, was on the staff of the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching. In 1910, 161 medical schools existed. By 1919, there were only 81 left. 1913, Rockefeller Foundation establishes the International Health Commission. This laid the foundation for how health and science research and development were to be conducted. Many of today's health institutes were modeled on this commission's practices, policies, and research processes, such as the UN's World Health Organization, the U.S. government's National Science Foundation, and the National Institute of Health. In 1918, public health became Rockefeller's foundation top priority. This foundation identifies public health and education as one of its principal areas of interest, and builds and endows the first school of public health at Johns Hopkins University. 1921, Rockefeller Foundation contributes $357 million to medical schools around the world. This spread of drug-based approach to the most prominent schools around the world. 1922, Dr. Royal Raymond Rife begins cancer research. In the 1920s, Dr. Rife, a brilliant bacteriologist, former student of Johns Hopkins University, began research and developing an alternative cancer cure. 1924, Morris Fishbein becomes prominent educator of JAMA, which is Journal of American Medical Association, is one of the most influential, or JAMA is one of the most influential medical journals in the world. As head of JAMA, Morris Fishbein becomes one of the most powerful, prominent men in medicine during the time. He transformed the industry into a money-making machine and used negative campaigns to squash competitors. He was one of the key figures in suppressing Dr. Royal Rife's cancer cure. In 1924, Harry Hoxsey founds first cancer clinic in Taylorville, Illinois. Hoxsey offers a natural herbal formula to cure cancer that thousands claim have worked. That is the first of 17 clinics to eventually open. In 1926, JAMA publishes first tirade against Hoxsey. The article scares doctors and researchers from being associated with Hoxsey. 1927, John D. Rockefeller Jr. gave the first of his annual $60,000 contribution to Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Research. 1932, Dr. Rife develops cancer cure. Dr. Rife developed a machine that could neutralize disease-causing microorganisms, including cancer cells, with the use of frequencies. 1932, director of Rockefeller Institute, Dr. Thomas Rivers denies success of Rife cancer treatment. Dr. Arthur Kendall, director of medical research at the Northwestern University, spoke before the Association of American Physicians at Johns Hopkins University about the preliminary success with the Rife's method and treatment of cancer. Dr. Thomas Rivers, virologist and bacteriologist, director of the Rockefeller Institute, a primary source of funding for medical research, and Dr. Hans Zinser called Kendall a liar to his face in front of the assembled crowd. 1934, Rife's treatment cures 16 terminally ill cancer patients. At the Scripps Institute in La Jolla, Southern California, Rife conducted clinical trials on 16 terminally ill cancer patients and successfully cured all of them. A team of medical specialists, including Dr. Milbank Johnson, chairman of the Special Medical Research Committee of USC, George Fisher of the New York Children's Hospital, and Dr. Waylon Morrison, the chief medical officer of the Santa Fe Railroad, confirmed the findings. 1938, AMA indicts Rife for fraudulent medical practices. 1939, Philip, are y'all following this? Yeah, okay. 1939, Philip Halen files suit against Royal Rife's company, the Beam Ray Corporation. Philip Halen admitted to accepting a $10,000 bribe from Hahn Realty Group, AMA agents, to sue the Beam Ray Corporation. 1939, new Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center opens. John D. Rockefeller donates the land and provides $3 million for funding. 1940s, Rife's work is destroyed and continues to be suppressed. 1949, Hoxie sues JAMA and editors of libel and slander. Hoxie wins. 1949, Morris Fishbein is ousted from AMA. 1954, FDA issues public warning about Hoxie cancer treatment. 1960, Hoxie method banned in the U.S. by the FDA. Lorton Rockwell serves as chairman of Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York from 1960 to 82. This center is one of the most influential cancer centers in the world. During World War II, it performed some of the first experiments applying chemical warfare weapons to the treatment of cancer, which eventually evolved into chemotherapy. 1963, Biomedical Hoxie Center opens in Tijuana, Mexico. It continues to operate and claims an 80% success rate. 1971, President Nixon declares war on cancer and signs $1.6 billion law. 1977, Sloan Kettering rejects Laetrile. It's vitamin B17 from apricot seeds, which is effective in the treatment of cancer. This is despite positive results from Sloan Kettering's own famous research. In November 1977, Dr. Ralph Moss, Assistant Director of Public Affairs at Sloan Kettering, held a press conference about the success and potential of Laetrile. Despite the center's desire to cover it up, Ralph Moss was fired the next day for failing to carry out the most basic job responsibilities. 1991, Rockefeller Foundation helped start Children's Vaccine Initiative. The foundation joins with the United Nations Development Program, UNICEF, WHO, and the World Bank to form the Children's Vaccine Initiative. In 2010, more than 500,000 Americans die of cancer. Wanted to bring up a book called Doctoring Data, written by Dr. Kendall. Also wrote another good book about cholesterol. The higher your cholesterol, the longer you live. The lower your cholesterol, the shorter you live. And he brings up a good point about the difference between relative and absolute risk. Say you have 100 people on blood pressure lowering drugs and 1 dies. 100 people on placebos, 2 dies. An absolute difference of 1%. Relative difference of 1 versus 2, or 50%. Say statin drugs reduce risk of heart disease by 40%. What is the underlying risk? You need to ask. Unless you know the underlying risk, the statistic is meaningless. So you need to see how the statistic is written. And then I wanted to get into your vote doesn't matter. I've seen all this stuff about Diebold. I've seen all the conspiracies. And then I found some new information last night that blew me away. You have the Athan Gibbs voting machine that was being pushed through the United States, and a lot of states were picking it up. the true voting machine. He brought out a good point that Diebold makes our voting machines. Diebold makes ATMs. When you go to the ATM and you pull some money out, you get a receipt. The way we should, he's also an accountant that knows how important it is to do auditing and leave paper trails. His true voting machine printed out a receipt of your vote. You put it in the metal box on your way out the door. That way, if we needed to do a revote or auditing for the machines, there's a good paper trail. If you look at the lawsuits on Diebold and the vote flipping, the counties that knew they'd had nowhere near 90% of the population there was going to vote for said person, it flipped the votes. Lots and lots, and it's all in cyberspace. There was no way for them to prove it right or wrong. But he was picking up steam, and his voting machines, they looked like they were gaining favor through the United States, and he was ran off the road right after a big presentation he gave and died. I didn't really get really big into politics in 2012, until 2012. And then I ran across this. The popular vote for Obama was 34,195,037. Popular vote for McCain was 91,030,864. The electoral votes for Obama were 270. 268 for McCain. Does our vote really matter? You start looking at the data, the research, the investigations, the Diebold voting machines. Look at the wealth of the corporate elite, the Bilderberg group that controls virtually everything. They say it costs too much money to change the labeling on our food so we know that there's genetically modified food in our Rice Krispies or whatever. But yet, they come out with boxes for the 4th of July and every other holiday. Cost too much money? No, they want to make, the new cool cutesy gremlin on the box. And they'll do it for 2 weeks. It don't cost too much money. Then we look at the taxes. Like I said, you've got your marriage certificate, which is a tax, your registration on your car. In 1933, the United States of America became a corporation. Your birth certificate came out with a number on the bottom of it. You're a ward of the state. You came through the birth canal, which gets into maritime law. A berth is where goods come into your country. And then a receipt is given. A receipt is given for tax purposes, and you pay the tariff. Now we have a birth certificate that is traded on Wall Street, and if you look at it, your birth certificate is worth millions. There's a whole lot of information on your straw man. Don't laugh it off. Don't call it conspiracy jargon nutcase information. I got a little upset. No, not me. I got a little upset when I was in the Navy, and we were sitting there with two lawyers doing our wills. And a lady asked, if you have any questions? I was like, yes, I want my sovereignty back. She's like, what do you mean? I said, I heard about the Free Man Project. I want my sovereignty back. How do I do it? How do I become a sovereign man? Well, she said, you have to go to the United Nations website and declare your land and your family, your people, whoever live in there, your own country, basically. What does that mean? Do I need a driver's license? Prior to 1933, the driver's license, speed limits, all that was for interstate commerce. Kind of making money for transporting goods and services across borders. I guess I'll close my talk with that. It was kind of broken. I apologize, but I'm sure our circle's going to be interesting.